¿Dónde está la prese? Good afternoon, everybody. Before we get started, could you please switch your telephone off, please? In 2015, I went to CETA, Córdoba English Teachers Association, to represent TESOL-SPAIN for first time. Then I was at the opening ceremony and I had the chance and the pleasure of attending María's Pérez talk about Clil. I must say that I was really impressed. And I told myself that María could be an asset for TESOL. When the president of TESOL asked me who I would like to invite for the closing plenary of our 41st annual convention in Madrid, I had no doubt about it, so here she is. Dr. María Pérez is a very busy professor at the Department of English Philology of the University of Jaén, where she's also Vice Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education. Her work has appeared in over 90 journals. She's also author and editor of several books on second language acquisition and second language teaching. María has given more than 100 lectures and talks all over the world. She's an expert on bilingual education, and María is first and foremost herself a product of the bilingual education. She has 20 questions for us about Clil, and I'm looking forward to hearing the answer. Thank you for coming. Thank you, María.
Thank you so much for such a warm introduction, and thank you all for coming and for sticking it out through to the very end. A huge thank you also to TESOL and very especially to Ana for the invitation, because I think I can only be described as a TESOL groupie, because I have attended the General TESOL Convention in the States several times, the ANUPI TESOL Mexico conference several times, TESOL in Ecuador, and I come to TESOL-SPAIN every chance I get. So being such a huge fan, you can imagine just how honored I am to be here today. So thank you for having me. Now the agenda for this final session is to focus on Clil, and specifically, as Ana was saying, to ask 20 of the most recurrent questions and to hopefully provide research-based answers to them. And I would like to preface my talk by underscoring that today I essentially come to you not as a grassroots teacher, but as a researcher and teacher trainer on Clil. So the perspective I will be offering is essentially top-down, okay? From the university downwards, providing a sort of bird's eye view of what the latest research is telling us about Clil. So we're going to focus on this very trendy acronym, which, as you know, has its equivalent in Spanish, in French, in Portuguese. I don't know if I'm missing out on another language, quite possibly. Now, how many of you here are being currently affected by Clil, either as a teacher or as a teacher trainer or as a parent? Or yeah, most of us, right? Absolutely. It's a real buzzword, yeah? And its popularity has caused it to be affected by what I call el fenómeno del cuñadismo. Do you guys have brothers-in-law? Yeah, you know that at Christmas dinners, brothers-in-law, they know about everything, right? No matter what subject you bring up, they know about it, yeah? Exactly the same thing is happening with Clil. Everybody knows about it. Everybody has an opinion, which they firmly believe is right. And today, we're going to try and counter this phenomenon by providing critical, updated, and research-based evidence. And I gotta tell you, we are living a fascinating moment right now in Clil research, because we're moving from the 4 C's. Remember the 4 C's? Yesterday, Professor Docoyle, she mentioned how they had gone viral, indeed. Well, I think we're now moving in Clil research to what I call the new 4 C's. Check it out. Look, we've got 4 C's in terms of periods. We started out with a period of what I call the Clil craze. Everybody was crazy about Clil. If we had to summarize this period with emoticons, I think it would undoubtedly be la flamenca bailando, okay? Everything was perfect. Absolutely all the studies that were carried out at this initial point in time found absolutely nothing wrong with Clil. Suspicious, right? The problem with these studies is that they presented methodological problems. Let me give you one example. These studies didn't guarantee the homogeneity of Clil and non-Clil groups, and sometimes the better students are in the Clil groups, at least initially. So the results were not valid. So from there, we moved on to a period of intense Clil critique. Yeah, now we've got the angry emoticons, and I think one of the greatest critics is undoubtedly Anthony Bruton, who was a retired professor at the University of Seville, and we're hearing a lot of criticism in the press and in social media, right? Have you read some of these articles? They're popping up every day, I would say practically every week, slamming Clil, harshly criticizing it. The problem with these articles is that they are based on opinions and on individual cases. I remember one of the articles, which was on screen a second ago. It was from here in Madrid, and it was based on an interview with a mother who said, "Es que a mi niña le ha ido muy malamente en el bilingüismo, entonces no funciona." Right? We cannot base our decisions on the opinion of one mother and her daughter, right? They're not scientific, they're not generalizable, they're not representative. So what's happened? Well, we're positioned within a Clil conundrum. We don't know what to think anymore about Clil, yeah? And I've documented what I call the pendulum effect in Clil, right? It's swinging back and forth from being a Pollyanna, everything is peachy, to being Scrooge, right? And being tremendously negative. So we're positioned in a real Clil controversy. And this controversy, interestingly, is playing itself out in the different specialized journals in the field. I don't know if you're familiar with them. If you take a look at these journals, you will find articles being tossed back and forth between what I call the Clil believers and the Clil haters, right? And the problem with this is, well, you know what? To be honest with you, I don't think there is a problem with this. I think this debate is very healthy. And it has infused the field with life. It's been like a breath of fresh air, right? But we do need to try and shed light on this debate and bring that metaphorical pendulum to a standstill. How? Through solid empirical evidence. And that is exactly what I'm going to try and bring you here today, okay? I'm going to bring you evidence from the latest studies which are representative. They worked with thousands of respondents. They have guaranteed homogeneity between the Clil and the non-Clil students. They've been longitudinal to see the long-term impact of Clil. And they factored in variables and triangulation for reliability. And finally, they're very updated. They're very recent. In fact, check it out. These are the studies that I will be mentioning. You have them all in the booklets that have been handed out in case you want to check them out in the future. And as you can see, they're like from 4 years ago at the most, and some of them are even in press for 2019, right? So they're very, very recent. And most of them will be coming out in special issues of journals or monographs. If you're interested, the first one, the green one, Porta Linguarum, is already out and freely available. And you can access all of them on our website, which is also in your info pack, monclil.com. So you click on the articles, and you'll download them for free, okay, if you're interested. And these are the ones that I'm going to be summarizing, all right? How? Well, I'm not going to stand here and tell you boring statistical data, right? I'm going to try and play a game, the game of 20 questions. Are you familiar with this game? Right? It's kind of like our Veo Veo, you know, but the person or the place or the event that we're describing doesn't have to be right within our eyesight. And in fact, I have picked for you the 20 most frequently asked questions that we are hearing right now all over the place on Clil, all right? And I'm going to classify them for you to be a little more pedagogical. The first 3 are going to revolve around Clil characterization. Then I'm also going to include a couple of questions on actual Clil implementation. The bulk of the queries will, of course, pertain to Clil research, but I'm also going to throw in a couple on teacher training, which I think is another very hot topic. And finally, we'll try and carve out a future Clil agenda by showcasing the most relevant challenges and implications, okay, for Clil. And I'll be using, as I mentioned, the latest publications stemming from research and pedagogical innovation projects to provide you with the data. All right, so first question, are you ready? Yeah? All right, let's hit it. Here they are. Here are our 20 questions. I've color-coded them for you in terms of those 5 blocks. And you've also got them on the very first page of your booklets in case you want to tick yes, no, maybe, right? See what you think from the beginning. Let's begin with the very first block, which I think is a necessary starting point. Questions on Clil characterization. These are questions that I hear all over the place. In fact, yesterday in the roundtable that the British Council organized, this very first question was posed, and that is, why on earth are we doing this? Isn't it unnatural to be teaching history in English in a rural town in Córdoba? Why? This is crazy, right? It's insane. Well, we're doing this because the research is telling us that what we were doing up until now, teaching English as a foreign language with a focus on form, it ain't working, okay? According to the latest Eurobarometer, we are unfortunately, together with the UK, the bottom rungs on the foreign language knowledge ladder. In Spain, 54% of our citizens admit to being monolingual. Only 18% can hold a conversation in 2 other European languages, which means 2 things, essentially. First, that we are miserably failing to attain that European mandate from back in 1995 that said that all Europeans have to be proficient in their mother tongue plus 2 other European languages. We're nowhere near that. And secondly, that what we've been doing up until now, the methodology we've been following, the approach, it's not really delivering. So we need to do something different. And now if we ask ourselves, why are we lagging behind? Again, the specialized literature tells us that the answer would probably be 4-pronged. First, because here we've got a conspicuous lack of foreign language teaching tradition. We can see this in the successive educational laws in Spain, which have pushed age of onset of language learning increasingly forward, yeah, from 11 to 8 to 6 to 3. This is compounded with lack of extramural exposure. Do you get a lot of English outside the classroom in Spain? No, everything is dubbed. Movies, series. The other days I was trying to watch a summary of the Oscars on the news. They were dubbed, right? I couldn't even listen to the speeches in English. So the latest studies are demonstrating that countries who subtitle have higher language levels than those who dub. And this dovetails also with methodological and linguistic deficiencies. We tend to teach, especially at university, through what I call bulimic learning. Right? We talk and we talk and we throw out huge amounts of information for our students to swallow and regurgitate on an exam, to then quickly proceed to forget them. And sometimes we teach English in Spanish, right? So, you know, the solution to all these problems, to all these deficiencies, has been thought to be Clil. Clil is the potential lever for change and success in language teaching. So what have we done? Well, we've gone around and we've set up a bunch of bilingual schools, right, all over the place. Which begs, of course, the second question. Are our schools truly bilingual? Because, you know, there are a lot of people, and I bring you quotes here, who say, Cádiz no es bilingüe de verdad. The only thing that's bilingual in our schools is the plaque on their doors. And I think this is perfectly summarized with a visual image, true story here, a picture that was taken in a Granada bilingual center, yeah, with a very Granada-like expression, yes. Vamos a quitar lo que queda feo, no? But, you know, a lot of people are saying, no way, which is actually leads to the question, is Clil, because that's what we're doing in our schools, right? We're doing Clil. Is Clil bilingual education? Well, if we again look at the specialists and we look at Metz Klein of bilingual education, it absolutely is. Clil would be right around here. Clil is bilingual education. It's the European approach. Just like immersion is the Canadian approach, And content-based instruction is the North American approach. Clil is the European one, and it's characterized by the fact that we normally don't have access to the language of instruction outside the classroom. We don't hear a lot of English, right? Which means that our students have a lower amount of exposure. But it is still absolutely bilingual education. So those people who say our schools are not bilingual should read up on Clil and know what Clil actually is. Now, does this mean, people, that our students are truly bilingual? What do you think? Right, right. You know, again, we have people who say, no es bilingüe, they can't talk and speak in English and in Spanish at the same level, and they have a very thick accent. Question is, do we want our students to be perfectly balanced bilinguals? No, we don't. The objective for Clil is not to arrive at a native-like perfect proficiency, but to have a functional language competence. That's it. We want our students to be able to communicate and work and study and get by abroad. That's all we want. So, of course, this impinges also on the linguistic command of the teachers. We no longer need to be native speakers, right? We need to be proficient and have pedagogical competence. That's it. As Brunig and Perman have put it, the term bilingual in most parts of Europe doesn't refer to a perfect native-like mastery, but to a partial, functional, foreign language competence. So no, of course we don't want our students to be bilingual. The goal is no longer to sound like Brad Pitt, okay? The goal is to sound more like Sergio Ramos, yeah? Not in his Merry Christmas message, yeah? But you know, I'm a huge Real Madrid fan, and I follow this guy on Twitter, and hey, he communicates perfectly intelligibly, perfectly understandably. That is our goal, okay? Alrighty, let's push forward to Clil implementation at the grassroots level. Big question. I don't know about you, but oh my gosh, I hear this all the time. And we discussed this in the British Council Roundtable yesterday. Are the most intelligent, motivated, and linguistically proficient students in Clil groups? Because a lot of people are saying they are, yeah? And that Clil is disintegrative, and that the non-Clil, they are remnants. As we say in Andalucía, el rejú, right? The worst part, you know, el refugio de los torpes. Now, is this true? Well, you know, yesterday we were discussing this in the roundtable. I think maybe at the very, very beginning, when we were just starting out at this, it might have been true because of the level of self-selection. But now, over a decade into Clil implementation, all the studies that have compared Clil and non-Clil students are finding they're increasingly homogeneous. So it is not true. Check it out. Look, from all these studies have administered tests, 3 types of tests: verbal intelligence, motivation, with 4 factors of motivation, and English level. And look, no statistically significant differences between the Clil and the non-Clil. This was done in nearly 100 randomly selected schools across 12 autonomous communities. So this, we can firmly say that now the self-selection in Clil has been reduced and we're tending towards more homogeneity. What about the move from theory to practice? Because we all know what Clil is, what it should look like in theory, but is this actually filtering down to on-the-ground practice? Because Clil was supposed to be it, right? A revolution, a catalyst for change. Is this true? Is this coming true, or is it a chimera? Well, 3 studies have focused specifically on this issue of whether theory is becoming a practical reality. And look, most of the thousands of teachers polled believe it is, believe that all the theory which bilingualism has generated has translated to the practical plane. On what specifically? Well, look, it seems that we now teach with more student-centered methodologies. Students have a more active role. There's an increased collaboration amongst teachers. Our materials are more interesting and innovative. And new technologies are requiring a particularly sharp relief. Of course, not everything is perfect. We do need to still work in ICT to a full extent, especially computer-mediated communication. And catering to diversity is a major niche to be filled now that Clil is being mainstream program-wide. We also need, according to the latest research, to increase parental support so that parents feel empowered to help their children with their homework, right? And to participate to a greater extent in their education. And finally, we cannot let down our guard on training. Teacher training, especially for linguistic area teachers and teaching assistants. So we have a ways to go still, but yes, we have made progress, and we're seeing the theory reaching the practical plane. Okay, let's now address a bunch of questions which I'm hearing a lot on Clil research. And I think the first three need to be, of course, the impact of Clil. Does Clil improve foreign language competence? Because, you know, Javier Marías, he said, el resultado es un desastre total. Ni enseñanza, ni bilingüe. Los chicos salen sin saber nada de inglés. Now, is this true? Let's take a look at the research. All these studies have focused on the effects of Clil on the foreign language. And check it out. In primary education, when bilingual and non-bilingual kids were compared on all these linguistic aspects, the bilinguals were already better. On a couple of aspects, there were no differences. When you see a cross, it means no differences between the groups, right? But in general, the bilinguals were already outstripping the non-bilinguals. What happens in the long term in secondary? Check it out. Now the bilinguals are better across the board. So yes, absolutely, Clil does improve foreign language competence. No es un desastre total. It's a success story, all right? Another very legitimate question, which came up again yesterday in the roundtable, what about Spanish? Does the fact that we teach more through English detrimentally impact their Spanish? Now, what would your gut feeling tell you? No, right? Because we've got a lot of extramural exposure to it, yeah? Well, studies have confirmed this, right? In primary education, the bilingual groups were not only not worse in Spanish, they were better. And this was maintained for secondary education. So we can rest assured that Clil is not detrimentally impacting the L1. Now, another very legitimate concern is whether Clil waters down content, right? Because there are many critics right now who are saying, yeah, we learn English, but it's at the expense of the content, which has to be watered down or reduced. Is this true? Well, look, again, in primary education, the areas on which research has focused are primarily these, okay? History and geography, math and science. And in primary education, we have mixed results. There's a batch of studies which have found that the Clil learners are better. Others which have found no differences between Clil and non-Clil learners. And others which have found that the non-Clil are better. Right? So in primary education, we don't have a definite answer. But what happens in the long term, in secondary, when these kids have been schooled in Clil for over 10 years? Now, all the studies that we have demonstrate the supremacy of the Clil learners. So, Clil does not water down content learning, and we can see this especially in the long term. It's going to take time. Okay, you are not maybe going to see it at the end of primary education. So we've seen that there are differences between the Clil and the non-Clil groups, right? But what is truly responsible for these differences? Is it Clil or is it something else? Is it socioeconomic status? Is it rural, urban? What can be held accountable for this? Well, a series of studies have performed discriminant analyses, which basically isolate those variables responsible for the differences between the groups. And for the differences in foreign language competence, the Clil program is the responsible variable, especially in the long term. And look at what we found as well. Interestingly, for content learning, extramural exposure also had a very important weight. So the more English the kids get outside of school, the better their outcomes on the content subjects. So we're going to have to act upon this, and I'll tell you later how. So yes, absolutely. It's Clil that is largely responsible for these differences. And we've seen that Clil especially works in the long term, right? At the end of secondary. But what happens in, in bachillerato, We sometimes discontinue Clil because of selectividad, yeah? So what happens? Do the effects of Clil pervade, or do they gradually disappear? Well, we compared, again, in general, bilinguals and non-bilinguals in baccalaureate, and the bilinguals who no longer had Clil were still better. This occurred in the public schools, but check it out. When we compared the public bilinguals with charter concertados who were non-bilingual, there were no differences. So the charter students who were not bilingual were catching up, which means that the broader takeaways are that the effects of Clil pervade, but they're mitigated if the programs are discontinued. So we want to continue them if we seek for the language competence differential to be maintained. So up until bachillerato and up until university also, if possible, and we're working on that as well. Okay, so we've already mentioned this, and I wanted to address it as an explicit question, because can we expect results right away? I have a lot of parents in primary education who say, oh, my daughter, she's in 5th grade and I'm not seeing any results and she's having such a hard time learning the contents and it's more cognitively complex for her. And I always tell them, you know, patience, because look, for the effects of foreign language, on foreign language of Clil, the results increase from primary to secondary to baccalaureate. The same happens for content subject. The effects are much stronger in secondary education. And when kids have more than 4 years of experience in a Clil program is when they start to truly appreciate it. So this takes time. We cannot expect results right away, right? As Luis Fonsi would say, we need to go despacito, yeah? So patience is the key word. We now turn to another crucial question. Now, I don't know if you've heard this a lot. I've heard it tons. A lot of people say, you know, Clil is elitist, and it's not gonna work. It's only gonna work in urban schools, in a private context, with a high socioeconomic status, right? In fact, many of the articles that I have been reading in the past weeks speak of un clasismo brutal, una pesadilla elitista, right? I'm quoting. Again, let's take a look at the research, yeah? It is true that maybe, as I was saying before, at the very beginning of Clil implementation, there was a little bit of elitism, because in some countries, like the ones you have on screen, kids have entry requirements to participate in a bilingual program. They have to have a high language level or a high content level or both. But this is not the case in Spain, right? We don't have admission criteria, although it is true that maybe at the beginning, as I was saying, there was self-selection, which was bolstered by parental choice. But now we're moving from bilingual sections coexisting with non-Clil streams to fully bilingual schools, right? So, you know, again, perhaps we could think that Clil is increasing rather than hindering equity. Let's see if this is the case research-wise. All these studies have compared how Clil works, with 3 different rungs of socioeconomic status, okay? Normally, we take the parents' educational level as a proxy for this. And of course, when we compare them, as can be expected, the best performers were in the top rung. But this occurred for primary, secondary, L1, L2 content, and for the bilingual and non-bilingual. For everybody, socioeconomic status is an important variable. But not only for Clil, for content learning and for anything else, right? And in fact, the latest studies, and I was saying yesterday that we really want to keep an eye on this, because the very latest studies in the past 2 years are demonstrating that in secondary education for L1, L2, and content, there are differences in terms of socioeconomic status for the non-bilinguals, but not for the bilinguals. It seems that the bilingualism is causing the students to level out. So it could be increasing equity, and this could shoot down claims for elitism. So let's keep an eye on that and see if the upcoming research confirms this trend. And what about the diverse contexts? Because we hear as I was saying before, that Clil only works under certain conditions. So in one of the studies, high schools were taken, like this one that you have here in Iznayoz. Have any of you been to Granada? Well, if you know Granada, Iznayoz is a town in the middle of nowhere. In fact, to go there, I remember I got car sick, right? It was an awful road. They have a majority of gypsy ethnicity, low socioeconomic status, of course, rural context. Does Clil work? We took perfectly homogeneous Clil and non-Clil groups, and check it out. The Clil students were much better. Now, Clil here, and I was blown away by this school, is working perfectly. In fact, when I was in the hallways, I was surprised by these kids in segundo, tercero de eso, speaking in English. When we observed classes, they had active student-centered methodologies. They drew up videos. They followed biology classes 100% in English. It was amazing. And when I was approached by Historias de Luz to do a sort of mini documentary on our project, they asked me, in which high school do you want to tape this? I said, Montes Orientales, because I want everyone to see that Clil has the potential to work, even in the most disenfranchised contexts. And you know what the key variables here were for the success of the program? The teachers. They had a C2 level, they had a PhD, they were involved in research, in pedagogical innovation, and they were a highly cohesive and collaborative team who provided a solid top-down push for Clil in this school. So provided it's properly done, it can certainly work. And I always tell this anecdote because I have been informally observing this in Granada as well, in Granada, the capital. My gym is in La Chana. I don't know if any of you, again, those of you who've been to Granada, La Chana, dodgy area, yeah? My gym is right next to a public bilingual high school. And you know how teenagers write graffiti saying, María, te quiero, right? The other day I stopped to take a picture because in the high school they had written in English. So these La Chana high schoolers are declaring love for one another in English. So, you know, yes, if it's well done, of course it can work in different contexts, even in Iznayoz, even in La Chana. All right. Now, another question which I wanted to share with you, and which gets me really fired up, is, can results from one context be applied to another? Because check it out. This study here, does it ring a bell? Came out like a year and a half ago here in Madrid. It said that primary students who had followed the bilingual program 10 years ago did worse on content than the non-bilinguals. Do you remember that? Well, these people, you won't be able to see that, but let me tell you, they said that the results of this study in Madrid 10 years ago can be extrapolated to any other context. And Broca, who's a researcher in Sevilla, says a couple of years ago exactly the same things, right? These results can probably reflect other contexts. And to these people, I say what we say in Almería, which is where I'm from. I say, ¿qué dice? ¿Qué me estás contando? This is not the case. What's happening in Madrid 10 years ago is not the same as what's happening in Andalucía right now. We cannot extrapolate results, right? I've got, in fact, a friend who's a secondary school physical education teacher in a bilingual high school. And he says, Marisa, if your results are positive and these people's are negative, aquí alguien miente. And I say, no, Danny, nobody's lying. What's happening at one place at one point in time doesn't have to be the same at another place 10 years later. We need to replicate, that is, to repeat the studies in different contexts, and to use our data, of course, with the largest samples possible for representativeness, to make informed decisions, okay? So don't believe these people that you read. All right, and we now turn to the final two questions on research, which concern exposure, which I think is another key area on which I'm hearing a lot of stuff, okay? First, and this is very important in a country like Spain, does Clil favor more exposure to the language also outside the classroom? Remember before we were saying that we have very little extramural exposure because we dub everything? Well, is Clil helping us out here? There have been studies, recent, again, as you can see, which have administered surveys on the number of hours that these students spend reading in English, watching series and TV in English, playing video games, which is huge amongst the boys, listening to songs or going to academies, right, or private language lessons. And look, invariably, and especially in secondary education, the Clil learners have a lot more extramural exposure. So yes, Clil is favoring more exposure outside the classroom. These kids are seeking out more English, which is great news for Spain, right? And this ties in with the next question. What's better, more Clil or more traditional EFL, hardcore, form-focused instruction? You know, I hear this a lot. I hear this from my head of department at the university. He said, forget about Clil, just reduce the number of hours of math and put in more hours of EFL. Don't teach math and English, teach more English. Is he right? Well, what we did was compare kids who went to public bilingual schools, Clil, and had no other exposure to the language. They didn't have private academies, private lessons with more formal EFL instruction. Only Clil, okay? And the EFL in school. And we compared them with non-Clil students, so they only had EFL in school, and then they had extra EFL classes through private lessons. So what happened? Look, in primary education, not many differences, but in secondary education, the Clil learners were better across the board. What happens if the Clil learners also have extra English lessons? Well, now, look, boom. Now there are differences even in primary education. So the broader lesson here is obviously the more input, Clil or EFL, the better. But if we have to choose people, research has evinced that Clil works better than more EFL. The authentic, meaningful exposure favored by Clil is better than the hardcore, form-focused learning favored through EFL, right? Okay, how you doing? Yeah, good? All right, let's move on to our fourth block then. Ooh, moot point, teacher training. One of my favorites. You know, I was discussing this morning with Mandy. You know, we've been throwing our teachers out there to teach in a sink or swim situation because Clil has spread so rapidly that it has outpaced teacher education provision. So have we really made progress in this area from 10 years ago? Well, I am happy to report, people, that we have an increasing number of studies on teacher training for Clil in Europe, and I am so proud to report that we have many more in Spain. We were also talking about this. Spain is very conspicuous on the Clil research map. We should feel proud of ourselves. And if we take my autonomous community, Andalucia, as a case in point, by the way, here in Madrid, there have been fantastic studies as well on teacher training, especially led by Anna Hallbach's team. And our trajectory has been one of implement, do stock-taking, research, and then troubleshoot the problematic areas that have been diagnosed to make sure that this stays on track. And if we trace the timeline, we find that there has been a constant replication of studies on teacher training. And what have these studies revealed in the past 10 years? Well, that we have made progress. We've made progress in the language level. We started out with a B1. We're now zoning in on a C1. We are also focusing on more communicative student-centered methodologies, applying a more diversified and holistic type of evaluation. And now our teachers are happily more informed about the theoretical underpinnings, the official documents guiding Clil. So yes, fortunately, we have made progress. But I ask you, are we there yet? What do you think? No, we're not, are we? Again, let me bring you the latest research. What are the areas of teacher training that still need to be addressed? Well, look, I was surprised by these findings. Linguistic level is still right up there. I thought this was covered. Turns out it's not. You know, a few years ago, I heard Emma Dafoe, who was here yesterday at the round table. Top notch. Big fan, are you? Me too. You betcha. Well, she reported, I remember, and I always quote her, she said, yeah, I get teachers who translate directly from Spanish into English, telling the kids, do you want to shut up? ¿Queréis callado? Right? Instead of saying, you guys, keep it down, or hush. And the thousands of teachers who have been polled in the latest studies have been saying, vamos a peor in language training. We can't access a C1 and a C2 as easily as we would like to, and we especially need linguistic training for infant, primary, and content teachers. And you know what area of language they need help with? Not CALP. They've got the CALP. They need BICS. They need the language to communicate in the classroom, to tell the students to be quiet, to get them to work in groups, to praise students' work, etc. Right? So we still need to work on that. I thought we didn't, but turns out we do. Second main area in need of further work, methodology, right? And it turns out that it's especially teachers who have hit the C1 level who require more methodological competence. So the language is like the basis. Once you've got that, you want more methodology. And the teachers are saying, methodology and language are like las dos ruedas de un carro. No se puede hacer andar el carro sin una de las dos, right? Or con una más grande que la otra. So we need both of them to be addressed in a balanced way. And interestingly, we also found that the theory underlying Clil is still a problem. Many teachers are not familiar with it. You know, a lot of teachers are saying, yeah, we're tired of these university professors coming in and preaching at us. We want practical tips, right, to implement in our classroom. I always quote Maestra de Pueblo. I'm a big fan. You know, she says, soy experto en flip learning, coaching, gamification y Grommenauer. ¿En qué centro dices que trabajas? No, yo que doy charla y eso. Right? We're sick and tired of these university teachers coming in and giving us theory. We want practice, yeah? This is totally true. This is perfectly legitimate. But don't forget that it's just as dangerous to preach what you don't practice as to teach what you have absolutely no theoretical grounding about. So we do need a little theory, right? We need to know what Clil is, where it comes from, how it's working, a little bit, even if it's just a tad. Because I have gone to hundreds of high schools, and I would go in and I would ask the teachers, ¿Qué? ¿Cómo va la ICLE? And they would say, ¿El qué? They're teaching Clil, supposedly. They don't even know what the acronym is, right? So we need to be informed, at least, of the basics. Another problem, collaborative competence. A lot of teachers are reporting they don't have time to coordinate and collaborate within school hours. And they're having to resort to out-of-school time. This is increasing their workload and decreasing their motivation. This is bad news because I think the success of Clil schemes is largely reliant on teachers' motivation. So we can't afford to have that go down. And we're also in need of further ongoing training, right? Having the teachers engage in constant recycling and updating through exchange programs, study licenses, courses abroad, masters. We're not doing this as much, so the authorities should take note and provide incentives and time for them to do this. So, as you can see, we have made progress, but we still have our work cut out for us, right? And this ties in directly with the future. What are the challenges, based on what we have seen in the 4 previous blocks, that we're going to need to address in the future? Well, I think the first question here would be, what are the implications of all this for all the stakeholders, right? Because here I'm sure we've got representatives from all the chief stakeholders involved. Well, I think there are implications for all of us. Parents? Any parents of bilingual learners? Well, the implication from the research for you guys is that we've seen that the more input, the better, right? So let's make sure our kids are getting extramural exposure to English at home from the earliest age possible. Cartoons in English, games in English, songs in English, getting them to play with a native speaker in English. Or, you know what's happening now, and a lot in Andalucía? Parents who have an adequate proficiency and who feel comfortable and natural with it are practicing the one parent, one language approach. So the mother is speaking to the kid in Spanish, the dad is doing it in English. And even if he is a native speaker of Spanish. And there's even a blog on this in Andalucía, Crecer en Inglés, where a dad from Sevilla is following his 2-year-old son's progress. And apparently it's working really well. And I hear this out on the street in Granada as well. A lot of parents speaking in English, even if they're Spanish, to their kids. Whatever you do, increase that extramural exposure. What about for private language academies and lessons? Well, you are crucial. You continue to be crucial in providing that input. Make sure, since we saw that more Clil is better than more EFL, that your input is not only hardcore form focused, grammar, vocabulary, but that it's as communicative as possible. Authorities, gatekeepers, teachers need time, incentives, support, and availability to be able to participate in teacher training schemes. This is crucial. And what about materials designers? Well, I would say 2 main lessons gleaned from the data. First, we saw that BICs, remember, were a problem, the language for communication. It would be great if materials could work in language chunks to empower students and teachers to be able to communicate in the Clil classroom. And also, work in guidelines, a lot of parents are asking for this, in Spanish, for them to be able to help their kids with their homework, especially parents who have a lower educational level. As regards teacher trainers, if there are any teacher trainers here, make sure that you provide little bit of theory, don't forget about it, and a lot of language and a lot of practice, and that you are abreast of the latest research so that you target real teacher training needs. Teachers, you are the cornerstone of Clil's success. So make sure you don't lose that motivation. Make sure that you're up to date with the evidence so what you don't believe everything you read in these articles, which are mushrooming practically every day. And for us researchers, we need to continue replicating studies. And I would also urge those people who don't do research to go and roll up their sleeves and get down to it, because it's interesting that in Clil, some of the loudest critics, like Anthony Bruton, are constantly criticizing and constantly asking for more research while conducting none of their own. So we should not listen to constructive criticism from anyone who hasn't constructed anything. Get down to it. Do it yourself. Okay. So, greatest niches for the future. Where is this going? Because, you know, I think most of these questions, people, they've been burning issues up until now. But I think, based on the research evidence, they should become non-issues. We should get over this. We should stop harping on these questions and get on with the real issues that are going to shape the future Clil agenda. Which are they? Well, I think catering to diversity is at the very, very top. We're mainstreaming Clil now. We're moving from bilingual sections to fully bilingual schools. In Andalucía, by 2020, we want to have thousands of fully bilingual schools. So Clil is going to be for everyone. Will Clil work for all? Will it work equally well for over and underachievers? To be honest with you, I don't know. We don't have research data. And up until now, we've got like a 50-50. There's like half of the studies that have been carried out say, yes, yes, with our student-centered methodologies, we're going to be able to cater to diversity. It's not going to be a problem. The other 50% is saying, what? This is going to cause Clil to flop. Right? It's gonna undermine, curtail everything that we've done so far. So we need research on that, and we need activities to cater to diversity. And we need teacher training modules to empower teachers to cater to diversity. We also need to find a balance between BICS and CALP. You know what? I've been alarmed to go into a lot of schools. I remember in one of them, in 6th grade of primary education, the kids were able to reel off in English the parts of the electric juice blender and the washing machine. I don't know those in English or in Spanish. And they couldn't ask their classmate to borrow a pen. This is sad, right? We need BICS in there as well, not just the CALP. Make sure we maintain a balance. As I was saying before, also supporting parents, providing them with guidelines, and I think with information. You know, if they get anxious because their 5th grader is not benefiting from Clil, apparently, tell them, hey, this is going to require time. This is what the research is telling you, information and support and guidelines. We should also, of course, replicate studies. And hey, not just us at university, teachers as well. It's great to have classroom-based research to see how that's working, to become an evidence-based practitioner. And of course, we cannot let our guard down vis-a-vis teacher training, acting upon all those niches that we identified. And finally, let's see if once and for all, we can debunk the false myths that are surrounding Clil. Because we've got the empirical evidence, okay? And they could really demotivate us. If you're interested in this, I'll be happy to share with you the volume we're preparing for Springer, where we actively strive to debunk those myths one by one with empirical evidence. All right, so final question. How are we making ourselves useful to address these niches? Because we're not just preaching, right? We're practicing. And what exactly are we doing? Well, we have just asked for a brand new European project on catering to diversity. Remember I mentioned that's a major niche? We want to explore that. And in fact, Doe Coyle and other researchers are involved to see whether we can offer activities and teacher training modules and data on this. We're also striving to extend Clil to university as much as possible. Remember we said it works in the long term? In bachillerato and also at university. In Jaén, for example, we're setting up a plan for the promotion of plurilingualism to get this rolling. We're also offering loads of courses. I always mention an association which is very near and dear to my heart, GRETA, the Andalucian English Teachers Association, who always offers every year on a Teacher's Day, often in Jaén, which is going to be next week. You're all invited, by the way. They focus on Clil, so it's a great way to get our pre-service teachers to become familiarized with it. And similarly, I have undertaken a personal crusade to work on BICS through a pedagogical innovation project called El Proyecto Reclil, Real English for Clil. I've been doing this for over 10 years now because I'm very concerned with this and with the deficiency we have in BICS, in communication. So we have designed a glossary with thousands of especially words, but especially chunks, right? Groups of up to 8 words, which are actually used by native speakers, which are updated, and which I think can empower teachers in their Clil classrooms. Let me give you examples. You know, for example, my husband is a math teacher in a bilingual high school. And to praise his students' work, he would always say, well done, right? And I said, Alberto, why don't you try, hey, you guys, way to go. Kudos, nice going, right? Or instead of, you know, to scold students, say, stop it. Why don't you try, you guys, knock it off, give it a rest. Or to tell them to be quiet, do you want to shut up, right? No, no, no. We want to say, you guys, keep it down, hush. Okay, so we've designed a glossary with words like, hey, you guys, awesome work. Oh, by the way, you know what the word for awesome now is? And teenagers are actually using the word sick. If something is sick, it's really cool, right? So sick work, you guys. Awesome work. Call occasions, like instead of saying, hey, your composition was much better, way better. Or phrasal verbs like, okay, class, to wrap up today's work. And lexical phrases, instead of saying, what do you think? Why don't you try, guys, what's your take on this issue? Or acronyms. The students love these, especially if they're bad words like WTF. And sounds, really interesting. You know, now to say you're welcome, we no longer say you're welcome. We say uh-huh or mm-hmm. In fact, there was an article just last week saying that millennials are bent on killing you're welcome. And now we just say mm-hmm. That's all you need, right? And we have designed a batch of activities to overcome what I call the it's raining cats and dogs syndrome, right? People, we invest precious amounts of our time in teaching and learning expressions nobody ever uses. So why don't we invest that time in expressions that are updated and real, yeah? We've designed activities. I've included one of them for you in your booklets. And we piloted them on Twitter. Feel free to tweet me. I will gladly retweet you for my students. I feed them a real English expression every day. And this is going to come out next month in a volume by Peter Lang, which again, I will be more than happy to share with you, with batches of activities to empower Clil teachers for BICS with real updated English. And finally, we're also creating new master's degrees. This is coming out in September, brand new master's in Enseñanza Bilingüe y AICLE, fully online, intercollegiate between Jaén and Córdoba, but fully online, so anybody from Colombia to Zaragoza can do it. Focused not on general bilingual education, no, on Clil, on our approach to bilingual education, and very realistic. We don't want preachers, right? We want university teachers co-teaching each subject with a primary or secondary school teacher who is there at the grassroots level. And we're honored that key figures like David Marsh and that Oxford University Press is co-financing this with us. And we hope that it will be a case of evidence-based practice, because the structure of this master's, which you also have in your booklets, is based on the latest research on teacher training needs, on real needs that teachers have been evinced to have. All right, so to use a real English expression, let's wrap this up, shall we? I'm going to turn it over to you, see if you have been listening, yeah, for the past hour or so. And in these, this hour that we've shared, we have, to sum up, addressed 20 questions pertaining to Clil characterization, implementation, investigation, training, and challenges. And I hope that all of them, in conflation, have allowed you to obtain a deeper insight into where we stand and where we need to go. So that if someone now asks you, is Clil bilingual education? What are you going to say? Of course it is. It's the European approach. What about, do we want our students to be perfectly balanced bilinguals? No, we don't. We want them to have a functional competence. And does Clil positively impact L2 competence, or is it un desastre total? Does it impact it positively? Absolutely. We saw it across the board. And is it detrimental to Spanish? Absolutely not. And what about to the contents? Is it watering them down? No, especially in the long term. And does it have the potential to work even in La Chana and Iznayoz? Yes, it does, if it's well done. And is more Clil better than more hardcore EFL? It is. Meaningful exposure works. And right now, where we stand, is everything peachy? Is it perfect? No, we still have quite a few things to fine-tune and tweak, but do we at least know what challenges we're up against? Yes, we do, and that will make it easier for us to address them. So I come back full circle to the very first question I posed. Are you ready to step up to them? Bring it on, right? Because is it worth it according to the research? It absolutely is. So let's hope that armed with this research and pedagogical knowledge, we can usher in a new era, the era not of the 4, but of the 5 C's, where we overcome the craze, critique, conundrum, and controversy and move into the era of Clil conciliation, or concord, or calmness. I have no idea what the 5th C will be. But in any case, a period where that pendulum has come to a standstill, right? In fact, according to Doe Coyle, there will come a time when Clil is not even used anymore. It's going to be like new technologies. They're going to be so commonplace, so mainstream, that we're not even going to notice that we're using them. But until that moment arrives, I strongly encourage you to maintain the attitude that we have been defending here today, and which I think is perfectly summarized in a quote by Noam Chomsky in a recent interview. Don't take assumptions for granted. Begin by taking a skeptical attitude, especially towards everything we're reading, and be willing to ask questions, which is exactly what we have done here today. So thank you very much for your attention, and at your entire disposal if you have any more questions now or in the future. Thank you.